All right, let's go to another question, on to another topic. Okay.
Now, keep in mind that you may have said this on one of the days
Yes.
that I wasn't here.
Yes. I'm going to give you a...
Ooh,
There you are.
thank you so much. It's a world-building question. I know we're to avoid getting trapped in the endless cycle of world building.
Yes.
Is there a warning sign when you know that, oh, I should just stop now?
Yes. And it has to do with output. Make goals for yourself. If you're not achieving your goals, then reassess. If your goal was wrong, or you're spending too much time on something else. A quick rule of thumb. Most people will write between 250 words and 750 words an hour. 750 is a lot. 250 to 500 is going to be where a lot of people are, okay? That's one thing to keep in mind, just so you can kind of gauge yourself. But if you're wanting to do this professionally, now remember, world builder's disease, if you want to have world builder's disease, and you want to do this, and that is what's fun to you, there's nothing wrong with that. We're not making moral judgments about what your goals are. But if your goal is to write professionally, you need to be able to produce a book. I would say if you're not producing one book every 2 years, in sci-fi fantasy specifically, you've got to look at what you're doing, okay? Now, you can find outliers. How often does Connie Willis produce a book? If you go look at her bibliography, she's probably doing one every 3 or 4 years. And she's one of the most well-respected authors in science fiction right now. So there are going to be outliers. But as a new writer, if you're not hitting whatever those goals are, then look at it. One book every 2 years, I would say is a minimum. Really, you should be shooting for one book a year, depending on the length. Particularly if you're doing 100,000, 120,000 word books, one book a year is pretty good. And then we can break that down. Let's look at what we're doing. So let's say that you are writing, let's say you're writing 500 words an hour. You should be able to get to 500 words an hour, I would say. So 500 words. So, and you're going to shoot for a 120,000 word book. I do. All right, someone who does math, tell me what this is. 1,200 divided by 5. What's that?
240 hours.
240? All right, so you can make a goal on that. 240 hours. 240 divided by 52.
Not off the top of my head.
What, 5?
Ish.
5-ish hours? 5-ish hours a week. That's not a huge investment of time. I would assume that if you're taking this class, you can find 5 hours a week to do your writing. So there's a goal for you to go right there. 120,000 word book a year. If you're going to try and write epic fantasy and you're going to be in the 200,000 word range, then perhaps you need to up this and try to shoot for 8 hours a week. Should be fairly doable. If you're serious about this, you should be able to find 8 hours a week. More than 8, I can start to see, that's like, that's getting really troubling, particularly for people who have a 40-hour-a-week job and kids. 8 hours is going to be stretching it. But most people, how much is the average person watching TV a week?
20 hours?
Yeah, or playing World of Warcraft or whatever it is that's your personal hobby. So you need to find 8 hours out of that time. Don't take the time from your job, that is your job, or your family, but take the time and say, I'm going to, my leisure time is this. And maybe you just don't have it. But I think 8 hours is pretty reasonable, and you can be writing an epic fantasy every year if you're willing to do that.
So I still don't exactly know how word count kind of corresponds to pages, but so how long in some vague page count is 100?
In old terms, we thought of 250 words to be a page. That was Courier 12-point double. Nobody uses this anymore, but that was kind of where it was. It was between 200 and 250 a page. Okay.
You said Elantris is 250,000?
250,000. Yeah, when we published it, I think it's 212 or something like that. I trimmed a lot in the revisions.
So what do you do if your word count is too low and you need to have a higher word count?
That is something that very few people run into, but it does happen to about usually about 1 out of 10 people. I think I've mentioned before, ends up being low on that. I would say you need to add a subplot, which is a conflict related to the character interactions or to the character's personal passion and motivation. For instance, they want to find through the course of this what happened to their father. Or they want to, or you need a relationship plot between these two characters. Your overarching plot is something completely different, but you're going to add that in. Or the character is searching for the most delicious, perfect apple that has ever been in existence, and so every town they try an apple. Something like that. Add a few of those things to add complexity. The other main way to add to your word count is to add another viewpoint character. Okay? There was one over here, I think. No? Maybe? Yeah.
Well, I was just thinking that if you feel it's too short, another option is with Amazon these days,
Yeah.
you make shorter novels, just
You
snap
can.
those out like once every like 3
You
months
can.
and keep selling them like that.
My novellas have done very well on Amazon and in ebooks. They're in print and ebook, but they sell way better on ebook. And so it's a perfectly viable strategy these days. If that's what you do naturally, and you feel the stories are strong that way, don't inflate them just because. But if you're having trouble hitting your word count goals, that's you feel like you want the book to be that certain length. Those are things you can do.
We touched upon this a little bit when we were talking about contracts and publishing.
Yeah.
You publish different genres of your own fiction with different publishers. Is
I
that
do.
correct? Okay.
But it's getting muddied. It used to be I had one children's publisher and one adult publisher, but I've given the adult publisher some children's books and gone to a different children's publisher for a different set of children's books. And so basically it kind of comes down to what we think is the best deal, where we think we want to be with a given story, which publisher we think is more enthusiastic about it. The reason I'm not at Tor with Steelheart is I felt they were more enthusiastic about The Rhythmatist, way more enthusiastic than they were about Steelheart. And so selling them Steelheart when someone else was really enthusiastic about it felt like the right move to me.
So I know it kind of depends on the readers, but how do you judge how many viewpoints you should go to? Like I've heard you should. I mean, I've heard varying opinions.
Okay.
Like you should only do 1 or 2, but some authors do tons of different viewpoints.
You'll notice that most authors, barring insanity, which some of them are insane, they'll start the book with fewer viewpoints and then expand as the series progresses. If people often point to the Wheel of Time, but that book, the Eye of the World, I think had 2 viewpoints, maybe 3, and Rand is the viewpoint for the entire first half of a 300,000 word book. So there's 150,000 words of one character before you add a second one, and that works very well. There's no answer to you. Each additional viewpoint adds learning curve and complexity, and that's just what it does. It's going to lengthen the book, add complexity, and add to the learning curve. But the complexity and learning curve are part of what's fun. It's going to also make your story more immersive, more expansive, and these sorts of things. New writers, tell the story you want to tell. I would not go over 4 for a new writer, but that doesn't count throwaways, where you do a viewpoint from someone's viewpoint for like 1 chapter just to show a cool perspective. Mistborn, Elantris and Mistborn were both 3, and that worked really well for me as a new writer. 3 primary viewpoints in a given book.